right, we are back again for another episode of TLN Live. Today we are breaking down the Big Ten 2026 season. Hoagie, how's it going, man?
Good. Let's go. We're another week closer to college lacrosse season. Obviously did the ACC preview last week. Now we're doing the Big Ten preview. Hold it close to my heart as a former Ohio State lacrosse player, so love talking Big Ten lacrosse. So.
That's right. No bias at all in this episode. I just want to give a shout out to everyone.
Not.
Lincoln, Mark, Luke. I see all you guys in the comment section. Keep dropping in who you think is going to be the number one team in Hoagie's rankings for the Big Ten this year, or just who you think is going to win the Big Ten, or if a Big Ten team might win the national championship this year. Drop that in as well. Want to know where you're watching from, and we'll be shouting you guys out, answering your questions throughout the show, so keep dropping them in the comments. I see you guys in there. One more shout out. Gavin, Sebastian, Connor. Tag your friends. Get them in here right now. Let's jump right into it. What do you say, Hoagie?
Let's do it. Let's get after it.
As you can see, we bump it up to 6 teams now. Let's keep an eye on the time. We've got an hour. Let's get it kicked off right now with your number 6 team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, number 6. I got the Michigan Wolverines coming in at number 6. Obviously, had a great run for the previous 2 years prior, winning the Big Ten tournament. Those two years prior to last year, Ohio State was the champions last year, but Michigan on some kind of Cinderella type run the years before that. But I got Michigan starting at number 6. Crazy, it's Coach Kevin Connery's 9th year already at Michigan. Wow, a lot of time flies. So, but I think for Michigan, there's a lot of question marks in terms of their offense, right? You know, you lose Ryan Cohen, you lose Aiden Mulholland, a bunch of guys who've been, contributors on that offense now for a long time. And, the question this year is going to be, where is Michigan going to find its scoring offensively? And that's going to be their major challenge in 2026. They lose offensive coordinator Scott Bida. Obviously, he heads over to his alma mater and heads to Rutgers. They bring in Will Corrigan, the new offensive coordinator, over to Michigan. But, they don't return a single goal scorer last year who had 20 goals or more. So there's a lot of players that they're going to need to replace, especially those guys like I mentioned, Ryan Cohen, Aiden Mulholland. You look at guys like Jenkins, Bo Lockwood, Nick Road as guys who initially stand out from guys who had points last season. But the offense is going to be the big question mark. I think if you're going to look at Michigan's strength, it's going to be on the defensive end, especially with, a bunch of great defensive players. And they bring in Hunter Taylor back as a senior now. But a couple transfers also came in that we'll touch on too. Jack Waldman coming from Georgetown, and then Elliot Dubik from Maryland. So I think the offense is going to be the question mark, and that's why I have them at 6, because it was a problem last year, and they struggled a lot in a lot of games to score goals. So,
yeah, I got to be honest. When you first sent me your ranking, I was like, "Is this Michigan disrespect? Is this just hate? How are they 6?" Then I really dug in and looked at like who's coming back and who they lost. And I was like, "Wow!" I had the same question. Who's going to score goals? Who's going to put the ball in the back of the net for these guys this year? They lost a lot on that end. Hunter Taylor, good goalie. Mason Whitney, good long pole. But I was looking at the names they're bringing back on the offensive end, and I was like, "Ooh, man." Nick Rude was really the only guy I remember in terms of being a playmaker, scored that game winner against Maryland in triple overtime. But then he got hurt. And so, didn't get to see him much after that. But one advantage they do have, Hoagie, I want to mention, is some seniority. They've got 18 grad students and seniors on the roster, which is tied with Maryland for the most in the Big Ten. Do you see any possibility where Maryland or Michigan can kind of lean on that seniority, lean on that experience to win them some games this year?
I don't think they can necessarily lean on the experience or the seniority to kind of win those games, but I think they can lean on their defense to a degree. We've known lacrosse has been trending, especially lately, as more of an offensive game, but I think this defense does have enough power in them that they can, keep Michigan within striking distance to, give their offense a chance, to be able to keep them in games and win games. You mentioned Mason Whitney, obviously one of the best defenders in the Big Ten for the last couple of years. They brought in Georgetown transfer Will Timinovich, who I think is going to be a great defensive piece for them. And then obviously Hunter Taylor back in net to anchor that defense. Obviously he's played a ton of games, and they also have Liam Entenmann now coming onto staff. So he's going to teach him some tricks of the trade, right? So you can only think Taylor's already a very solid goalie in net. Now you bring in Entenmann, arguably the best goalie in the world right now. If not, he's 1, he's 2. So, teaching him the ropes as a coach. So I don't know if seniority can win them games. They have a lot of guys with a lot of, experience, but defensively, I think having that defense where it is, a lot of familiar faces. You bring over a good transfer. You obviously lose Pace Billings, who I thought pound for pound last year was one of the best LSMs in the country. He was all over the field. But I think that defense can keep them in games. But the question mark is really going to be, can that offense get the double-digit goals? And they didn't in a lot of games. I think they beat Rutgers last year 8-6, which is like a crazy low-scoring game for today's standards. But yeah, the defense should be great, but I don't know if seniority can kind of propel them all the way.
Shout out Zotz in the comments section, stole my next question, said they're going to find a way to beat Maryland again, no matter what. That is the weirdest thing about Michigan. You may have them at number 6 right now, but they've won 4 straight against Maryland. Beat them last year, as I mentioned, Nick Rude scoring the game winner in triple overtime, 11-10. The last time Michigan lost to Maryland was when Maryland went undefeated in 2022. Head coach Kevin Connery was an assistant on Maryland's staff under John Tillman from 2013 to 2017. What do you think it is? You think he's got one of John Tillman's old iPads or something? Why does this team have Maryland's number?
I mean, that's a joke that we've heard constantly over the years, that he took an iPad on his way out or still has access to the system somehow. But to me, as someone who obviously played at Ohio State, played in the Big Ten, to me, this is kind of Big Ten lacrosse in a microcosm. Every single game in the Big Ten Conference is a grind. It's a physical battle for 60 minutes. It's a different kind of game that you're going to play maybe in the out-of-conference or maybe in the NCAA tournament. Like, each week, game in, game out, like every game's a battle in the Big Ten, whether you're at the top or the bottom. So, I think Michigan kind of plays that unique style of having very strong defense, and the Big Ten tends to be more of a defensive type battle of a game than, when you match up against an ACC opponent, right? Like, they seem to be more low scoring, more slow, 6-on-6, not as fast a pace in Big Ten games, which fits what Michigan wants to do and has wanted to do under Coach Connery. So I think it's a little bit of that. And then, a little bit also of like Coach Connery being at Maryland, obviously was there for 5 years. He was the associate head coach under Tillman. So kind of seeing how Tills prepares and operates and kind of knows what Tills looks for, I also don't think hurts. Kind of like a Nick Saban type disciple thing with all these other coaches. You kind of learn how Tills approaches, this matchup, or what he looks for in this matchup, and how he attacks this and how he scouts for this. And you kind of pick up on little tendencies that I think Connery's been able to take advantage of that other teams haven't. So a little bit of mix of those two things, I think, but also just, Michigan's had some talent. They really have had a ton of talent the last couple of years, especially with Mikey Bain when he was on that roster. So it's a little bit of both. I don't know if Maryland's seeing some ghosts, and it's kind of like the Michigan-Ohio State thing, where Ohio State was better last year, or 2 years ago in Columbus, and Michigan came in and beat them. So maybe you're just a little timid and they're in their head, but we'll see. I'd be shocked if they go 5 for 5 this year. I think Maryland will get them, but you never know. The game's in Ann Arbor this year.
I'm sure it'll be on our pick'em, and I'm going to be hard pressed not to pick Michigan in that game. But we'll see what happens. Stephen wants us to mention Lindenwood. Not playing this year, not in the Big Ten, so you're not going to get a mention other than that. But shout out everyone else in the comment section. Let us know what else you want us to talk to as it relates to the Big Ten. And by the way, that's a 6'4" gorilla ball, I think, that you're describing, is what Connery would call it, as opposed to the ACC pretty boy ball, right?
Yep, that was years ago, that comment before the UVA game.
Yeah.
And it didn't end too well for Michigan, though, that game. I remember that comment went pretty viral.
Well, Michigan and UVA played each other in the fall, and I heard Michigan got the best of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell in these scrimmages because you never know who's playing, who's not, and what the score is and whatever. But I think they played out in Philly this fall, if I'm not mistaken, in the shadows of Subaru Park, where we were for the PLL semifinals, at the Philadelphia Union's practice facility. I saw some clips on YouTube somewhere of that scrimmage. But, yeah, we'll see. I mean, I guess what we've learned is you never really know until they're on the field. This isn't as much as other sports like college football, where you kind of know who's starting at every piece of the puzzle. You kind of find out on week 1. So we'll see what they're made of. But, yeah.
I think we should move it on to number 5. And unfortunately, I haven't seen Scotty, our friend Scotty Royster, Lax Guy Scotty, in the comments section just yet. And he might miss his favorite team at number 5. Who we got?
Rutgers?
Rutgers.
At number 5, we got the Rutgers Scarlet Knights coming in at number 5, Brian Breck's squad. And honestly, if I'm being honest, I could see Rutgers trending more up than I could see them more dropping back to 6. I think they're a sneaky team in the Big Ten. I don't think they're maybe necessarily a team competing towards the top to maybe win the conference, but I think they, could sneakily spoil someone's season out there. Last year they got a couple. They obviously beat Maryland last year, which was an awesome game. They beat Hopkins too, and the team was super young a year ago. I thought, it was evident in a bunch of big moments that they kind of just last spring, they were right there, but just kind of, you could tell that lack of youth and kind of that lack of experience held them back to a degree. But, I think they're going to be a scrappy bunch this spring. I think they could be the Big Ten's biggest surprise when it's all said and done. I mean, to me, they bring offensive coordinator Scott Bita over. Like I mentioned, he left Michigan to come over to Rutgers, to come under Brian Breck. He was, played for Breck back in the day. So he's going to bring that offense over there. Colin Cardilla, to me, pound for pound, maybe the best midfielder in the country. If not, he's one of the best. I think, he was awesome this summer for USA U20, and, he's been great so far at Rutgers. And then, you got Carden Stoller in net. I think, again, one of the better goalies in the country who's seen a ton of rubber. He's played a lot of games. I feel like he's been starting there for so long. So you got a lot of pieces in there and foundational pieces, star-studded pieces, I think, that can make this Rutgers team good. How far can they go, and can they be a tournament team? I don't know. But they could be your sleeper team in the Big Ten this year to kind of make a little jump.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned spoiling seasons. That was crazy. That game against Maryland last year, I think they went up 5-1 in the first quarter, and it's like, okay, Maryland, they'll chip away at this and they'll win easy. And it's like, all right, wait, okay, Rutgers is still winning. Carden Stoller's scoring goalie goals. I think we need to prep an upset graphic, and we did end up posting that upset graphic. It was probably the craziest upset of the year last year. But not only that, they beat Hopkins in their first game in Big Ten play. Hopkins never recovered. They didn't win another Big Ten game after that. And then they also knocked Michigan out of the Big Ten in the quarterfinals last year after losing to Michigan in the regular season. So Rutgers was stunning everyone left and right. And I'm also glad you brought up those two players, Colin Cardilla and Carden Stoller. I want to ask you a little bit more about each of them, because Cardilla, I think's got real potential. This guy's going to be a real stud. I'm curious whether you think he's going to be a future PLL pro, because not only did he play for USA U20 team in Jeju, South Korea this summer, he was kind of their go-to offensive initiator out of the midfield, and he was one of only 3 Americans who ended up making the world team at the end of the tournament. So do you see him, he's only a junior this year, as a top pick in the PLL draft in 2027?
I absolutely see him as one of the top picks in the 2027 PLL draft, without a doubt. Like I said before, I think Colin Cardilla has a chance this year to be a first-team All-America type player. This kid's shown a ton of talent, and played obviously great for Rutgers through his first 2 years. He was one of the leaders. I believe he was a captain on that USA U20 team this summer. So one of the main contributors on that squad. And yeah, Cardilla kind of, I think, can, bring that run of Rutgers midfielders into the PLL. Obviously, Shane Knobloch a couple years back was a first-team All-American midfielder who made his way into the PLL. So without a doubt, Colin Cardilla is a future PLL pro. And, I expect him to be a big name. I think people do know him in college lacrosse, but I think, after this season, you're really going to see his hype really continue to grow. He's also a New Jersey product, Bridgewater kid. So gotta love the hometown kids playing for the hometown school. So
absolutely. Now, and I want to ask you about Carden Stoller as well. And I kind of want to put you on the spot. As an Ohio State guy, I know that you're definitely team Big Tasty, Caleb 𝐓𝐄𝐄, but last year, the Big Ten does it in a wacky way where it's just straight up names on the Big Ten first team. I think there was 1 midfielder and 3 goalies. So Carden Stoller, Caleb 𝐓𝐄𝐄, and Logan McNaney were all first team Big Ten goalies. Carden Stoller and Caleb 𝐓𝐄𝐄 have kind of mirrored each other. Stoller took a red shirt year, but the last 2 years, they've been full-time starters for their respective Big Ten programs. Do you think Stoller could unseat Big Tasty as the best goalie in the Big Ten this year, or is that locked up to 𝐓𝐄𝐄?
I mean, I think Big Tasty, pound for pound, is the best goalie in the Big Ten. And if you ask me,
why do you say pound for pound?
Because I think Carden Stoller is an unbelievable goalie. And I think, Carden Stoller to me is a guy who for sure can challenge Big Tasty. If you're going to ask me between the two, which goalie I would take on my team, I'm going to take Big Tasty. And if you're asking me who I was going to take for goalie of the year, I'm going to take Big Tasty. But Carden Stoller is just below, and I think can play himself right on pace with Big Tasty. I'm a big Carden Stoller fan. I see the way he plays. I've obviously, he's got, like I said, played a lot of games. He's very big in stature. He's able to make a ton of big saves. And, he's kind of a guy to me that when I watch him, he's very patient. He doesn't panic. He doesn't guess. And he makes the saves he's got to make. So if you're asking me if he can unseat Big Tasty for the best in the Big Ten, of course he can. And I think Carden Stoller would be the next goalie in line in the Big Ten to be able to challenge Big Tasty. If we're looking at the rest of the conference, I would take Cardin Stoller if there's going to be a challenger to Tasty. So for sure, it can give him a run. If I was going to take one, I'm obviously taking Tasty, but Cardin's right there, and I expect him to have a great year this year.
Yeah, I think he's going to be lights out. Keep dropping in your thoughts on the Big Ten and the college lacrosse season in general in the comments. We'll shout you guys out. James Hogan is breaking down right now the Big Ten heading into the 2026 season. We're about to reveal the number 4 seed. But first, I want to ask you one last question about the Rutgers. How much is Colin Cardilla and Cardin Stoller? I'm more thinking Cardilla because Hunter Taylor's a good goalie. How much did Cardilla factor into Rutgers being over Michigan here?
Yeah, I think for me it was the two pieces that we've talked about with Rutgers, with Cardilla, obviously me having to believe he has first team All-American type potential, and then Cardin Stoller, same as him, as maybe not a first team All-American, but an underrated goalie and could challenge for the best goalie in the Big Ten, could try and challenge Tasty. So to me, you had two pillars there, and I think Rutgers, what I saw last year, especially towards the end of the year with how young they were, the wins that they were able to get, beating, Maryland, going into Ann Arbor in the first round of the Big Ten tournament and beating, Michigan, and then being competitive with Ohio State in that semifinal game gives me, some confidence that next year they're ready to, kind of try and take that next step. And Brian Breck's been known to, kind of have Rutgers sneaky, right? Like Rutgers is kind of one of those schools that I feel like always has a chip on their shoulder just because no one really ever wants to give them that respect. And they had that great run for a couple of years where they made championship weekend and were kind of second fiddle to Maryland in the Big Ten, but still never fully got that full respect nationally. And I think, Brian Breck, if there's a year where he can kind of have them, where no one's talking about them and kind of get them trying to trend towards the top of the Big Ten, I think when you have two pieces like him with Stoller and Cardilla, you got a chance. So, and then I think offensive coordinator Scott Bita is going to be big. I think whenever you bring an alum in the program who has experience and good ability on offense like Bita, I think that always helps everything else with cohesion. So, all
right, let's keep it moving. At number 4, who you got?
At number 4, I got the Johns Hopkins Blue Jays coming in at number 4. This is a big year for Hopkins and Peter Millman, I think. Hopkins obviously in 23 and 24 went to the quarterfinals 2 years in a row, and it looked like, wow, Hopkins is back. I think they're ready to come back. And then last year, they started off pretty strong, beat Virginia, 1 goal, lost North Carolina, and then, the wheels kind of fell off after that. And yeah, I think this is a pivotal year for Hopkins as a program. You felt like you were on the up and up, and then obviously last year didn't go to plan, but this is where you got to flip the script now, and you can't have another losing year. They're kind of the last of the Blue Bloods to make that championship weekend push. Syracuse got that monkey off their back last year. Hopkins hasn't been a championship weekend since 2015, so they're pushing over a decade at this point. So, the pressure is definitely there for them to get back. But, yeah, I think Hopkins is, if you're looking at one team in the Big Ten that you almost maybe don't have any idea which way they're going to go, I kind of have them squarely in the middle. And can they go up? Can they go down? We don't know. They have tons of good pieces and tons of great players, but how that's all going to fit and go together, I guess, is going to play out, and we'll see how that all goes.
Yeah, I was shocked that this is a Hopkins team that went from winning the Big Ten or undefeated in the Big Ten in the regular season and then not winning a single game in the Big Ten the following year. But when you look at the personnel, there was a lot of turnover. They had to replace some pieces. The one thing that's shocking to me, I was expecting a big year from midfielder Matt Collison, and it didn't happen. Although his point total was identical, 33 points in 2024, 33 points in 2025, the clutch moments were missing. I think back to his game-winning goals in overtime against Ohio State and Penn State a couple of years ago. Last year, it didn't really seem like Collison had it in the big moments, and he was also their leading scorer with 33 points, whereas a year before, he was behind guys like Jacob Angelis, Garrett Degnan, and 33 points as the third guy on the team is pretty good. 33 points as a leading guy is not enough. And he's also never matched the 35 points he put up as a freshman in 2023. So how much pressure is on Matt Collison this year to go in there and produce and kind of put Hopkins on his back in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of pressure because I think, Matt Collison may ultimately dictate how Hopkins seasons goes, right? Like there's a ton of pressure on him for him to kind of step up and take over games in 2026 for Hopkins. And I think, if Hopkins wants to be a legit contender in the Big Ten and wants to make the NCAA tournament and make a push for championship weekend, which ultimately is a standard at Johns Hopkins, right? It's to win national championships. It's to make championship weekend. It's not just to play lacrosse games. Like, he's going to have the best season of his career, in my opinion, if they want all that to happen, given, the outlook of the team. I think he's going to have his best year. And, you mentioned it before, Kev, when I think of some of the big plays he's made, I always think of that goal he had in overtime against Ohio State and, his ability to kind of stretch the field and use his body. But yeah, this has got to be a big year for him. I think the offense has a lot of good pieces on it, and we'll probably touch on it shortly. But yeah, if Collison's got to be at his best this year, and he has to have his best year as a player, because I think last year we were expecting him to kind of have that jump, and it was a little underwhelming. So this has got to be the year if you want Hopkins to make it be a tournament team.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a PLL draft pick no matter what, but there's going to be questions asked if Hopkins unable to get the most out of him this spring. Another player that's worth highlighting here is 𝐓𝐇𝐄 𝐋𝐀𝐂𝐑𝐎𝐒, junior defender, played for USA U20 team, another guy who made the all-world squad. He was named a solo captain at Hopkins, which almost never happens. First time in 37 years, Hopkins has a solo captain. So a little bit of a two-part question. One, do you think that solo captain thing is, it's obviously a good thing for 𝐓𝐇𝐄 𝐋𝐀𝐂𝐑𝐎, but does it say something about the rest of the roster that no one else is worthy of captain? And secondly, are we sleeping on 𝐓𝐶 𝐋𝐀𝐂𝐑𝐎 as a potential Big Ten Defender of the Year? Everyone's talking about Will Schaller, Bobby Van Buren. Is 𝐋𝐿 in that mix and we're just not even talking about him?
Yeah, I think 𝐋𝐿 100% can be in that mix. He's unbelievable. I watched him firsthand. I was at the Ohio State Hopkins game last year and kind of watched him up close at Homewood. And yeah, his ability to erase guys on offense and kind of match guys feet for feet, unbelievable. Obviously a stud, like you mentioned, at the U20 game. So yeah, I think for sure the country is sleeping on 𝐓𝐶 𝐋𝐿. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the country. But yeah, to go back to your point about the solo captain, obviously that's so impressive at a program like Hopkins, at a blue blood like that, to be, you're not an underclassman, but to be a junior and get named captain, that you be the only captain. Kev, when you mentioned that, I was kind of thinking, the flip side of it is that shows how impressive of a young man he is, that he is a solo captain as a junior at a program like Hopkins. But then also at the same time, when you said that, Kev, I kind of started thinking, well, there's not, a senior or another guy who's able to kind of step up on this team and be, a leader as a guy who's been here for a long time. So that kind of raised some concern, and kind of you're making me go both ways now and like which way I really think. But look, I think if I'm going to lean one way, I'm going to lean as a positive, because I think what I've seen online and social media, Hopkins has a very strong culture, and it seems like they're very strong and passionate about that culture. So I don't see Hopkins as someone who, he's the only captain for a reason. I think he's the only captain because he embodies what it means to be a Blue Jay and what it means to be Johns Hopkins lacrosse player. And I think, I've noticed Hopkins this year is going old school. Milliman, no stickers on the helmet, stripped him of all logos on gear. And, people feel different ways about it. Some people love it. Some people think it's corny to do that. But, you could tell Milliman pulled the full reset this year. It was like, look, like, you got a Hopkins, that's the bluest of blue as it turns into lacrosse history. But, last year was not Johns Hopkins lacrosse, and, something's got to change and something's got to flip. So to me, this is that 𝐓𝐶 𝐋𝐿 was the guy who most identified as the Hopkins lacrosse player and, lived up to what it means to be a Blue Jay. That's why I think he was the only solo captain. But yeah, I'm excited to see him play on the field. I think he's going to be a stud.
Yeah, I think it has more to do with him being exceptional as a leader than anything else. But to keep with the theme of pressure on Matt Collison, I'm wondering why he wasn't considered for captain, or definitely, if he was considered for captain, why didn't he get the nod? But yeah, 𝐋𝐿 going to be a beast. If you don't know his name yet, you're going to. He's going to be a Team USA senior player at some point. And an absolute stud for Hopkins and a pro one day. So keep an eye out for 𝐓𝐶 𝐋𝐿 this spring. Another guy we should keep an eye out for, and we kind of know his name. We at least know his last name. Star freshman coming in, Ollie Nolting. He's the younger brother of Asher Nolting, the Boston Cannons attackman. All-American at Cherokee Creek out in Colorado, and was a number 37 recruit at Inside Lacrosse in the last recruiting cycle. Do you foresee Ollie making a splash in year one with Hopkins?
I definitely think he'll be a contributor for sure and get on the field. I actually saw a post of him they posted before of him at practice today on Twitter. So I think we'll see a lot, and I can't wait for that first, ESPN broadcast with Carker Quimp being like the younger brother of Asher Nolting. That's coming all the time. But obviously a top 50 recruit, so he's got the talent, he's got the player ability in him, and I think he's going to be a guy who can contribute, and I'm excited to see Hopkins' depth offensively. I think they have a lot of different players who, can step up and become stars. Hunter Chauvet, you got Charlie Eiler, you got Eric Chick, Brooks English, tons of guys who I think can make steps this year. So 100% Ollie Nolting, I think, will be in the mix. You'll definitely hear his name a lot, not just because of his brother, but I think too because he'll be an impact guy in the rotation for sure.
Yeah, watching team social clips is not an exact science, but they were posting them in the fall. They're posting them already this spring. That tells me, he's kind of a focal point of the team already as a freshman. They're at least out there posting him, and he's got the big name. And he was USA Lacrosse's West Region Player of the Year, played in both All-American games, the Under Armour, or not Under Armour anymore, whatever, New Balance. And then he also played in the Adrenaline one. So I think the next day. So he likes being out there. He likes competing. And I'm really excited to see Ollie Nolting at the next level, especially because Asher was one of the most electric players when he was at High Point. But obviously there's that element of discovery when a player is at High Point and you're like, okay, who's this guy who is scoring goals against Virginia and Duke in February. And it's like, he looks like a tank. Like, we know who Ollie Nolting is from day one. And I'm really excited to follow his career over the next 4 years at Hopkins.
100%. I think, put the name to his side. Like we talked about, I think he's going to be a guy that at the end of the year, you're not just going to talk about him because he's Asher's brother and because he's Nolting, but because he's going to contribute and make plays in the field for sure. So,
you mentioned a bunch of role players who, the Hunter Chauvets, Charlie Eilers. Charlie Eilers is a big one that kept coming up last year when Russell Melendez went down. We were like, oh, Charlie Eiler's time. Charlie Eiler's time. I'm curious whether it's him or another guy that you mentioned that you see as a returning scorer who needs to make the biggest leap this year.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there with Charlie Eiler. Obviously, we talked about him a bunch last year, and I know Hopkins. We just talked about social posts. They were posting a lot of Charlie Eiler stuff for sure in the fall. So, he's one guy I definitely expect to make that big jump. But then also for me, it's Hunter Chauvet. And I think Hunter Chauvet showed flashes a lot of talent and a lot of, playmaking and high level ability, but then also had some moments where he kind of faded away. So I think for him, he needs to kind of take that next step of being a guy who can be relied on week after week to make plays and being a guy that when you need a goal late in a big game, in a tie game, in a fourth quarter, like you can go to Chauvet and trust him to get that done. So I think, for him, that's a learning thing for him. And, another year under his belt, I think surely will help with that. But Charlie Eiler and Hunter Chauvet are definitely the top two names that stick out. But I also like Eric Chick. Watch out for Eric Chick. I think he's very underrated player. I love his game. So we'll see if he can kind of take that step too.
He was my pick. I don't know if he's necessarily going to score.
I like Chick a lot, Kev. I like Chick a lot.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to score as many goals or have as many points as Hunter Chauvet. I think he's really got to step up and produce. But I could see Eric Chick being that guy who it's like, okay, give him the ball. He's going to go score, especially if the top poll is on Matt Collison. I could see Eric Chick getting some nice opportunities. One last thing to round out Hopkins before we move on here. Even though they couldn't win a Big Ten game, they had the best face-off win rate in the conference, 57.3%. You're the face-off guy. Had to ask you, do you see them maintaining that advantage? Will that be a strength for them again this year?
It's a big question mark because, you lose Logan Callahan, who obviously took a ton of reps over his 4 years. He was 60% last year, took over 300 face-offs last year for Johns Hopkins. The rest of the roster only took 21 face-offs. So if you took Logan Callahan off that team, you only had 21 face-offs on that team combined with the rest of the roster. You got a couple younger guys and Dan Shepard, who only took 2 faceoffs last year. Joe Hobart took 19. But the guy you're going to talk about that you're probably going to see starting is grad transfer John McKee from Dickinson. He had an amazing career at D3, broke a ton of records, has a ton of records in D3, has a ton of records in Dickinson, was one of the better players in all of D3 at the faceoff position a couple years back. So I expect him to be the starter for them. We'll see how he translates to the D1 game. Obviously, a couple years ago, we saw it with the player coming over from Tufts going to Syracuse, Mason Cone, who was able to translate and play well for the Orange coming from Tufts. So John McKee, I expect to be the starter. I don't know if they'll definitely have a 60% unit or the best unit in the conference again, but you replace a guy like Callahan, who I think has a lot of faceoffs and was great last year, but I expect McKee to be the starter. But we'll see. Ton of guys on that team, but that's where I see Hopkins at the X.
All right, Hoagie, we're halfway through our list. We're right on pace for time. Let's keep it moving. At number 3, who you got?
At number 3, I got the Penn State Nittany Lions coming in at number 3 this year, coming off a championship weekend appearance last year. Obviously, they lost to Cornell in the semifinals, but they were also the only team to beat Cornell all of last year. So Jeff Tambroni's squad, coming to the party here. 3 straight NCAA tournament appearances for Penn State and 3 championship weekend appearances for the Nittany Lions in the last 5 years. So to me, Penn State's fully arrived now on the circuit. I think is like a year after year. Expect them to be in the tournament team. I think, what Tambroni's done with that program over the last 5 years has been amazing. And I think they're going to have a good year this year. You lose Matt Trainer, so that's always going to be a big question mark. But we said the same thing 2 years ago, losing TJ Malone, right? And they replaced him with Matt Trainer. And we said it before TJ Malone, when you lose Grant Amon and Mac O'Keefe, and they were able to replace it. So who's the next man up to replace it? We'll find out this year. But Penn State's going to be good once again. I think they're going to be towards the top of the Big Ten every year as long as Tambroni's there.
Awesome. My comments were froze here, but I now see on my phone, I got the comments pulled up. I was like, why did everyone stop talking? But I see you guys now. Yeah, we talk about Matt Trainer and how big of his impact was. Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, led the conference in points with 61. The performance he had against Notre Dame to send them to championship weekend kind of illustrated the type of player he was when Penn State's in a pinch, and just how college lacrosse is so often when you need a guy to go get you a goal. It's such an incredible advantage to have a Matt Trainer on your roster. Well, now Penn State doesn't have one. If you had to pick a guy, who's going to be their go-to guy on offense?
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the two between either Hunter 𝐓𝐇𝐄 and Kyle Lehman. If you were going to ask me, I'm going to go with Hunter 𝐓𝐇𝐄 just because of his versatility. It's 16 goals, 21 assists last year. I think his ability to feed and score at the attack position is kind of going to be that guy.
You think he's going to play attack and not midfield?
I think he'll play attack this year. Yeah, I think he fits that more. I think you leave Lehman. Lehman had 26 and 7 last year. And then obviously you have Liam Matthews, who was, the inside finisher on that team last year. So I think 𝐓𝐇𝐄 is the guy, I think that he's going to play attack and he's going to move, and kind of be that Matt Trainer guy. Is he going to be that level of player? I don't know. And I think these guys can kind of sort themselves out once they get out there. It's big shoes to fill with Matt Trainer, but I think even if you don't get a guy per se that's like Matt Trainer-esque of like the total number one, I think they have a ton of very solid or above solid players, who are going to be very, very big contributors. So I think they're going to have a very balanced offense too, which I think is very underrated, especially today, of a lot of guys who can kind of distribute the wealth around. So I'm really excited for that. And then obviously the defense with Alex Ross, I think is, he's back as an anchor, one of the conference's best defenders, leader of this Penn State squad. So to have a guy like him back on defense too will be big. And, you know what you're getting with Penn State lacrosse. So it's shown now over the last couple of years of what style they're going to play, and they're going to be a hard team to beat week in, week out.
Yeah, I got Ross listed up there, as you could see, as a name to know, one of the top defensemen in the conference. I believe it was a second team All Big Ten performer last year. And as far as I'm aligned with you. I like 𝐓𝐇𝐄 as the guy to replace Matt Trainer's impact. When Matt Trainer was hurt last year with the shoulder injury, 𝐓𝐶𝐄 saw some run at attack and played really well. That was kind of when he was coming out. But I think with his size and just ability to stretch the field, they really like him at midfield. So I'm curious whether they put him at attack or midfield this year. But with that hole for Matt Trainer, I think 𝐓𝐶𝐄, it makes sense to put him in attack. Maybe he's a midfielder at the next level at the pros. But again, he was only a freshman last year, sophomore this year. Yeah. So he's got time. All right, moving on to another subject with the Penn State. We got to talk about the goalie situation a little bit. Last year was shocking that Jack Frassion kind of fell off a cliff, ended up with the worst save percentage in the conference, 48.2%. I don't know. Maybe you can offer some insight on who is in line to maybe take his place. But do you see the goalie situation overall improving in 2026?
I think it's a big question mark once again this year. I think it's either going to improve or obviously it could be more of the same, because we have two guys from the people that I've talked to, within the Big Ten, and people that I've talked to who've, heard around what's going on with this goalie situation. I'm hearing it's coming down to a 2-horse race between two guys who haven't really had any minutes. You got true freshman for Preston Hawkins, who's actually from Columbus, Ohio, coincidentally, and redshirt freshman Hayes Schreiner. I heard it's a dogfight between those two. The last time I talked to someone recently, they said that both those guys are getting equal reps right now in practice with the one. So the competition, I think, is going to come down to the wire, and it's a real competition between, you got a freshman and a redshirt freshman. So two guys who haven't played any games, don't have any experience, who are going to be, in between the pipes for Penn State, most likely week one when we see them against Colgate. But yeah, so if you're asking me on paper, I'm probably going to say it's going to be more of the same unless one of these guys steps up massively. But that goalie position is going to be massive for Penn State, and I think it could really dictate how far they go.
It's kind of the situation last year. I mean, they were a great team all around, and they just couldn't count on Frassian. He played all right, stepped up in some games, but then he just had some games where he was not himself. So I know Penn State would love to get that situation rectified this year with one of the freshmen or whoever is starting for them, get that solidified. Kind of big picture question I have for you about Penn State. People may not realize, but they've now been to the Final Four 3 times in the past 6 years. However, they have 0 wins at championship weekend. I'm curious what you see is standing, other than Garrett Ledman in the crease, what's standing in between Penn State and a win at championship weekend? And do you kind of see them as a team that's maxing out their potential by getting to championship weekend? They should be just kind of happy to be there? Or is the standard starting to raise and they should start thinking national championship?
I think the standard's starting to raise. They just start thinking national championship. I think if you went back a couple of years, yeah, you want to make championship weekend. But like I said, Penn State's made 3 straight NCAA tournaments for the first time in program history. They were back-to-back the year prior for the first time in program history. So the standard now is you make the tournament every single year. Now it's let's go to championship weekend every year. Whereas beforehand, maybe it was, let's make the tournament and then see how it goes. To me, I know they've lost all 3 in the semifinals that they've got there. To me, that has nothing to do with Penn State or anything. I think it's kind of just a bunch of misfortune. You look back at the games, 2019, that team was the number 1 team in the country all year long. They kind of ran into a buzzsaw on T.D. Erlin that day in the semifinal, who was like 85, 90%, took over that game. Then you look, obviously, in 23, the famous Garrett Ledman in the crease call that everyone talks about and will go down to history. And then last year, you played Cornell, who went on to win the national championship. C.J. Kurse, one of the best players we've ever seen. Cornell, sneakily one of the better teams we've seen in recent memory, too. Oh, and you beat that team in the regular season, so you happen to split with them in the end. So I don't think it, came down to anything that they, just happy to be there kind of thing. I think it was just a bunch of circumstances that happened, and it's hard to win a championship, but I expect Penn State to be a team that can definitely win a national championship in the coming years for sure.
Well, kind of on that note, Penn State is this weird team. Like, when we look around the college lacrosse landscape, it's hard to imagine some teams beating other teams. There's hard ceilings, just reality, fact of the matter for some teams. I'm curious what you see Penn State as, considering, as you mentioned, they were the only team to beat Cornell last year. Like, do you feel like this is a team that on their best day, they could beat anybody? Or do they still have that hard ceiling, like Maryland, for example? Like, can you picture them beating Maryland?
Yeah, I think absolutely I can picture them beating Maryland. I think I can picture them beating anyone. If I'm looking back just at last year, like you said, they beat Cornell. Obviously, they beat Notre Dame in the quarterfinals to make championship weekend when, a lot of people thought that was a shoe and it looked like it was a runaway. It takes a lot to be down 6 goals in the second half against the 2-time defending national champions, the standard in the sport at the time, and look them in the eye and go on a 7-goal run, 8-goal run and win that game. So, look, they showed last year they could do it. And I didn't even think last year was one of the better Penn State teams, of the last couple of years. That team, I didn't think had too many great wins during the season besides that Cornell game. I thought they kind of lost to the good teams in the Big Ten and beat the teams they should have in the Big Ten, and then kind of got into the tournament, got to play Colgate in the first round. It was like, I don't really know what to make of them. But look, they beat Notre Dame. They made it to championship weekend. So I don't think you could put a ceiling on them. I think Tambroni's great. He obviously has taken Penn State to 3 Final Fours when he was at Cornell. He took them all the way to a national championship. So Penn State, 100% is a team on the rise, 100% a team that can win a national championship in the future, without a doubt.
Yeah, I got to give Tambroni credit for his ability to find and then cultivate that elite talent, going from Grant Ament to TJ Malone to Matt Trainer to whoever's next. But that's kind of the thing that keeps Penn State at the top of the field, in my opinion. But there's teams above them at the top of Hoagie's Big Ten preview. Let us know right now who number 2 is.
At number 2, we got my alma mater, the Ohio State Buckeyes, coming in at number 2, the defending Big Ten regular season and tournament champions. Obviously, last year, big year for the Buckeyes. And I know it meant a lot to a lot of the alums, a lot to Coach Myers and, that whole team, to kind of finally get over that hump and win that Big Ten championship, for the program. And it was a long time coming. Nick Myers now in his 18th year at Ohio State. I think he's the longest tenured coach in the Big Ten, which is crazy to think. But yeah, I think Ohio State last year, for them to lose by 6 goals week 1 to Utah last year, coming off 2 straight losing seasons, everyone's saying, we need a reset. This team stinks. To kind of rattle off the longest win streak in the country at one point last year, to go on and win the Big Ten regular season title. And then it was like, okay, they won the Big Ten regular season, but they're not going to the tournament. To then go win the Big Ten tournament, dominate Maryland in the Big Ten tournament game, and make it to the NCAA tournament. I think, obviously it didn't end the way they wanted. And, the round 1 loss to Notre Dame was a tough one. They kind of had some momentum early, and then it got off the rails, and Notre Dame really put it to them. But look, I think that is only going to fuel this Ohio State team this year. I think this Ohio State team brings in a lot of veteran guys coming back. Obviously, it starts with Bobby Van Buren as a 5th-year captain now coming back. You bring back Big Tasty, first-team All-American. You bring back, in my opinion, the best defense in college lacrosse. You had a bunch of talented transfers, from all over the country. And, you bring in guys that I think are hungry and want to win. And, the biggest tell for that is a guy like Alex Marnier. Last year, first-team All-Big Ten player, 50-plus goal scorer on attack. Wasn't sure if he was going to come back or not. Ended up deciding not to at first, and then ended up coming back midsummer. I think, he's kind of like, look, why am I not playing for this team? We can go win it all. And, the motto for this team this fall has been make it to Everest, Mount Everest, meaning the top of the sport, the national championship. That's kind of been their motto is, look, we got the Big Ten championship and stuff last year. That's what we wanted. This year we want more. So I think Ohio State is being slept on personally, and that's, putting the bias hat aside, taking my Ohio State hat off and putting it to the side. I think this team is unbelievable. A ton of great transfers and a ton of great returners coming back. I'm really excited for this Ohio State team in 2026.
Hey, Levi Lee is right there with you. In fact, he might be a step beyond you in the comments section. He says Ohio State should be number 1. They are the reigning Big Ten champs.
100% make his case for it, I think.
Well, Hoagie, the mentality's got to shift. To be completely honest, I was very happy watching their run last year, but there was a very clear celebration and exhale warranted after beating Maryland and hoisting that Big Ten championship. And then I think they got the draw on the NCAA selection show. They saw they were getting Notre Dame. They knew, beating Notre Dame at Arlotta earlier in the season, like, okay, we already have a big red X target on our back by this team. They hate us. We're kind of getting screwed by the selection committee having to play them. And I feel like once they went down in that game, it was kind of like, all right, great season, but this is where it ends. They got to be expecting to win the Big Ten championship and then some this year. So I think that mentality has to shift, and I'm pretty confident that it will. But we also got to talk about shifting personnel. You mentioned a lot of the guys that got back. They lost a lot of role players scoring and new guys that are coming in here. I'm curious, where do you see Russell Melendez, the star transfer mid-season or mid-year transfer? So did not play fall ball with them. He just got on campus, I'm assuming, in the spring. But 124 points in his career with Hopkins and Marquette. This is his 6th year, injury-riddled career so far. But personnel-wise, where do you see him fitting in? We talked a little bit about it on the top 5 transfer show in the fall, but has anything changed for you since then?
No, I think he's either going to fit in, at that third attack spot, or they're going to try and run him out of the midfield, depending on where he fits. Ohio State runs a unique type of offense where, somewhat for parts of it, it's positionless, a lot of picks, a lot of screens, a lot of dives, lofts, throws across the field. So, there's a lot of areas where you could put him. The thing is, he's either going to have to play that third attack spot or he's going to have to play midi because, Alex Marnier is going to be a lock on that righty wing for Ohio State. Obviously 5th-year guy, had an amazing year last year. And Garrett Haas is the quarterback of this offense. And he's the guy that is the leader of this team now. He's a junior, but, he did a 2-year mission trip. So he's even older than his years go. And, I know he's one of the biggest leaders in terms of guys that, has the biggest voices in the locker room and sets a tone on the field. So even if you think Melendez could be that type of ex-quarterback guy, it's going to be Garrett Haas who's going to be that ex-quarterback guy just because he has that role on lock and he means too much to this team to kind of shuffle him around. So I think they're going to fit Melendez wherever they see fit in that offense, like I said. So it's either going to be that final attack spot, playing more on that lefty side, or they're going to find a way to play him out of the midfield. Like I mentioned, Ohio State's offense, very versatile, very positionless, and they got a ton of great guys across the board in terms of midfield depth. Liam White last year as a freshman was awesome. You added in Jackson Birtwistle from Syracuse, Brad Sharp from Yale, Logan Solberg from Yale. So tons of guys who have had a ton of experience playing, who've dealt with injuries in the past. And from the guys I've talked to in Ohio State, all those guys have been 100% healthy so far through fall and so far through spring. So those guys are going to be all impact players in the midfield. So I see Melendez sliding into that third attack spot, but I wouldn't be shocked if he also played some mini and, we moved him around. Coach Myers is known to kind of shuffle guys around. You saw Jack McKenna last year play some midfield, play some attack. Shane O'Leary, UMass transfer, same thing last year. So kind of can switch it up game by game, but I see Melendez kind of in that more third attack role for sure.
I'm excited to see Melendez and the transfers. Brad Sharp is a great midfielder at Yale. And Jackson Birtwistle, one of my favorite stat lines, 56 career goals, only 3 career assists. That guy knows how to put the ball in the back of the net. So I'm excited to see him healthy with Ohio State this year. I think he's going to be a guy who scores a lot of goals for them. But on the defensive side of the ball, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Bobby Van Buren and what they got going with Big Tasty. Bobby Van Buren has been mentioned already on this show and previous shows, shared the Schmeiser Award with Sean Light of Notre Dame in 2025. But he's got a line mate in Cullen Brown. If you look at the statistics, I mean, Bobby Van Buren, 16 caused turnovers. Cullen Brown, 34 caused turnovers. BVB, 24 ground balls. Brown, 60 ground balls. Are we sure Bobby Van Buren's even the best defender on the team?
Cullen Brown's the most underrated long pole defenseman in the country, and I think he's going to be a steal, whoever picks him up in the PLL draft this spring. Yeah, that defense is going to be unreal. I think, Bobby Van Buren obviously shared the Schmeiser last year. He's going to be right up for that again. Obviously, Will Schaller at Maryland is a stud too, so he'll have something to say about that as well. But, yeah, Bobby Van Buren, in terms of cover guy, pound for pound, in terms of match at feet, there's not a better player you're going to get in the country defensively than Bobby Van Buren. And this defense as a whole, Big Tasty, Bobby Van Buren, Cullen Brown, Kyle Foster anchoring the defense. And, Jacob Cohen, transfer over from Yale, is going to be playing LSM for the Buckeyes. I've heard a lot of great things from him, coming out of Columbus, that he's going to be a big impact player for them out of the portal as well. This defensive unit, I think pound for pound last year's best unit in the country. I think it's going to be, again, probably the top defensive unit in the country. Travis Crane has been doing it for a long time at Columbus. I think he's been there a decade now at Ohio State, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. He's going to have that defense right once again. But yeah, that defense is going to be great. And I think the defense is really what led Ohio State last year for sure. But this year, I think they even get a little more boost on offense. So I'm excited to see this Buckeye team.
That was kind of going to be my last question here about Caleb Falk, who was, best save percentage in the country last year, 61.2%, Big Ten Specialist of the Year, first team All-American, as you mentioned. Is there anything more he can do, or is it just time for the offense to take it to the next level and he's just got to keep it on lock, do exactly what he did last year?
I think it's just time for the offense
right
to take that next step up. And I think the defense is going to play the same they did last year, just as good. And I think the offense took a big jump last year compared to where it was previous years. But I even think this year, with the talent they brought in with the portal and the guys they're bringing back, I think this offense has a legit shot to be the best offense Ohio State's had probably since they went to championship weekend back in 2017. This offense has a legit amount of depth, of talent. A lot of guys put a lot of minutes, and they're old, who've had a lot of experience under their belt. So I think this offense, it's time for them to kind of take that next leap. And that's what they're going to need if they want to make a championship weekend run. It's this offense to be towards the upper half of the country this year.
I agree. We've got one more team to break down in the Big Ten preview show. I just want to clear up one thing in the comments section here. Jagger asking, what year is Big Tasty? He's only a junior. He's got 2 more years.
More years.
And then Gress says Melendez is an animal when he's healthy. Yes, he is. And as Hoagie reports, he is healthy. And Giovanni says, hey, he says, yo. So what's going on, Giovanni? Great to see you. And the rest of you, keep dropping in your comments because we're about to talk about the number one team, which by process of elimination is the Maryland Terrapins. This is a big year for them, Hoagie. It's all kind of pointing towards this. Last year, we talked about how they were greater than the sum of their parts, how they kind of find a way to exceed expectations. Doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter what letdown losses they have during the regular season, you can count on them at championship weekend. But when you're looking at this roster, this 2026 roster in particular, it's very easy to see and locate and find their strengths. Does this roster have a weakness?
Yeah, the weakness is going to be the goalie position just because it's a bit of an unknown. Obviously, we saw Brian Ruppel a couple years ago when McNaney tore his ACL come in and play well as a freshman and really play well, but I still think we haven't seen him now in a couple years, and that's going to be a position where can he do that again kind of for the full season? I think this is obviously a big year. It's national championship or bust every year at Maryland. That's the expectation, but this is the first year, I think, since that 2022 team where you got a legit chance to go win it. I think the last 2 years, those teams – Till's got the most out of them and got them kind of as far as they could go. And I don't know if they were really, national championship level good, but this team is national championship level good. And I think they're going to have some hunger to them as well. Obviously, you're always going to have that bitter taste in your mouth of losing the last 2 national championships, but Maryland hasn't had a share of the Big Ten regular season title or won a Big Ten tournament since 2022. So that's been 3 straight years without a singular share, regular season or tournament, of a Big Ten championship at College Park, which is shocking and not something that many people know. So I think Maryland's going to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder this year as well. And I think, the offense obviously is going to be led by Eric Spanos. He's going to be one of the favorites up there for the 𝐓𝐇𝐄. They're going to be, one of the best players in all of college lacrosse. And then, guys like Braden Erkson. We've talked at nausea about Leo Johnson and Chris Lyons coming over from Yale. And, fellow Ridgewood guy Jack Schultz last year was a freshman, was on the USA U20 team, super athletic midfielder. I expect him to have another massive jump this year and be a stud, not only nationally, but a big guy for this team. And then Spencer Ford missed all last year with an injury, redshirted. He's going to be there this year. So the offense is going to be fired up. The defense, Will Schaller, AJ Larkin, those polls are always, going crazy in College Park. But it's going to come down to goalie, and I think it's going to come down to face-offs to determine really how far this team goes.
If you had to make a pick now, you think it's going to be Brian Ruppel or the freshman Aiden Seibel?
I think it's going to be Brian Ruppel who starts on day one. I know Aiden Seibel, 5-star, number 8 overall freshman in the country, and has a ton of talent. But I think Brian Ruppel, been in the program, he's stuck it out, he's waited it out. I think if he knew the writing was on the wall, that he probably never would have got that chance. He would have hit the portal. He played well when he got his opportunity a couple years ago, kind of had to go back to the bench. I think Tills respects that, and I think he knows he's going to be the guy. So I expect Brian Ruppel to be the starter in cage for Maryland this year.
Me too. Let's talk about Eric Spanos and the fact that he's been given the legacy number 1 jersey for this year. This is kind of big. Eric Spanos was a guy who committed in 8th grade, was a big star coming out of high school. He didn't play at all in 2022 as a true freshman, has kind of bounced around between attack and midfield, found, I wouldn't say was a true Tewaarton Award star for the majority of his career at Maryland until probably the second half of last year where he really started to take over and look like the best player on that offense. But if you're comparing him to previous players, attackmen who wore number 1, the last 2 to do it, Logan Wisnauskas in 2022, 103 points, wins at Tewaarton, leads Maryland to an undefeated season. 2021, Jared Bernhardt, 99 points, wins a Tewaarton Award. That's the standard. So is Eric Spanos, to you, a guy who can put up 100 points this year or push for 100 points this year and win the Tewaarton Award?
Yeah, I think for sure he can. I think he's going to have a big year. Whether he's going to win the Tewaarton Award, I don't know. I don't know if I would have him as my winner right now, but I think, obviously it's tough to live up to the legacy of 2 of those other guys, stud players, but I think Eric Spanos, like you mentioned, Kev, took that jump in the second half of last year, and the kid's got a ton of talent. If you watch him play, I mean, his speed, his shiftiness, his quickness, I mean, he has a special, unique skill set that not a lot of people have in the country. So, yeah, I think, he can live up to that number 1 legacy, and that number 1 legacy is as prestigious as the number 22 at Syracuse. So, for a guy like Spanos to get that award and hold that down as the first offensive guy in a couple of years to wear that jersey, I think for sure he can live up to that. And I think for sure if Maryland's going to be that number one team, they're my preseason number one team, they're my preseason national championship pick. And if they're going to do both of those things, I think it's going to be because Eric Spanos has the legendary type number one Tewaaraton style type year.
Well, Hoagie, they could have easily kept that number one on the defensive side of the ball, given it to Will Shallers. No questions about him. Great player on the defensive side, and that's where it's been the last 3 years. With Logan McNaney last year, Ajax Sapatello the year before that, and Brett Makar the year before that. But now it's going back to the offensive side of the ball, and I'm curious whether you think that represents kind of an overall shift in philosophy and offense back to an offensive identity. When you think back to that 2022 season, we were talking about that Maryland team as one of the best. Defense was fine, but one of the best offenses of all time. So is this Maryland team going to be a breakthrough offensive unit that we haven't seen in a couple of years?
I think for sure. I think this is going to be the best offense Maryland's had since 2022. Just on cue, like you said, Kev. I think the offense the last couple of years was a little bit more methodical, a little bit more slow, not as dynamic. A lot of, relying on the midfield. You had a bunch of, Daniel Kelly, obviously, guys, playing like that who maybe weren't the shiftiest, most dynamic attack man out there playing. So, you had guys like Eric Maliver and, 𝐓𝐇𝐄 playing and, all those guys. So, yeah, I think this definitely demonstrates a shift more to the offense. Obviously, Chris Lyons and Leo Johnson have a big thing to do with that. And they're, we've been waiting now 2 years for them since they made their announcement almost to make an impact on the field. So, yeah, those guys are going to be studs. And I think this shows a shift back over to that offensive side of the ball. But I also think just because it's maybe a shift in an upgrade on offense than it's been in years past, the defense isn't taking too much of a dip themselves. That defense, AJ Larkin, Will Shaller, pound for pound, Bob Van Buren is arguably the best defender, I think, in the conference and one of the best in the country. So that defense is still going to be strong. You lose Colin Burlace, but yeah, this Maryland team, their identity, their culture is second to none and maybe the best in the country. So I think this team's going to come ready to play this year, and I think they're going to be hungry, and that's why they're my number one team and preseason favorites to win it all.
I think we're pretty aligned on Maryland being the best team in the Big Ten. I know we both think they're favorites, or at least among the favorites to play for and win the national championship. But I'm curious if you'll go another step with me, as we have just 2 minutes left here, so let's make this quick. This is the best Maryland team I think we've seen since 2022. That team went undefeated. Will this Maryland team go undefeated? And if not, who's the biggest threat on the schedule?
This Maryland team will not go undefeated this year. I think, given the look at their schedule, obviously they've known to hit some roadblocks in Big Ten play, right? So you're almost guaranteed for them to lose at least one Big Ten game. Potentially maybe two, but maybe one. And, out of conference, you play Virginia, Notre Dame, Princeton. But to me, the biggest roadblock, they got to go at Syracuse in the Carrier Dome early in the year. Syracuse and Maryland, to me, are the best two teams in the country coming into the preseason. We all know what happened the last time Maryland went to the Carrier Dome with that controversial goal-mouth goal, which they took the win off the board for Syracuse. And, obviously Maryland within seconds scored to walk it off. So, yeah, those are all tough games. I'd be shocked if Maryland comes out unscathed. I'm very high on Princeton as well. So between Syracuse, Princeton, Notre Dame, Virginia, and then that Big Ten schedule, I don't see the Terps going undefeated, but they did go undefeated against the ACC last year. So we'll see. Maybe they can make a run, maybe not. But either way, undefeated or not, this is Maryland.
You're forgetting John Tillman has never lost to Syracuse. And also, Maryland has kind of owned Princeton. So if this offense clicks like we think that it can, and they make it through the Big Ten unscathed, I think they go all the way undefeated. But
that game in the Dome might be game of the year early on. We might have to get a live MPLS there at the Dome for that game. That's going to be must-watch lacrosse in the Dome early on in the year too. So it's going to probably be 1 and 2. Can't wait.
Hopefully we don't get cut off here, but very quickly, Hoagie, can you give me your final predictions for Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Specialist of the Year, Freshman of the Year, and Coach of the Year in the Big Ten?
Yeah, this is tough. I'll try and rattle them off quickly, but it kind of determines a lot of time if you're trying to predict how these teams are going to do, because usually how the teams finish is how the awards kind of get handed out. Offensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Eric Spanos from Maryland. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Bob Van Buren from Ohio State. Specialist of the Year, I'm going to go with Big Tasty from Ohio State again. Freshman of the Year, I'm going to go with Ollie Nolting from Johns Hopkins. And then coach of the year, this one's tough. I think you can go a lot of guys. I think you can go to Nick Myers. I think the Ohio State's going to have another good year. I think you can go to Brian Breck. I think if Rutgers gets more towards the top of the conference, but how I'm projecting it, I think Maryland will probably win the Big Ten, which would put John Tillman probably a coach of the year. But tons of coaches who I think, can get in the mix there. But that's kind of my speed round. Obviously, we'll see how it all shapes out in the end, though.
I love you for being concise at the end there. Hoagie, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today. If you want to watch a replay, you missed the beginning of this, catch it on YouTube tomorrow. It'll also be on X, Twitter. Look out for the clips. Hoagie, any last words before we get cut off here?
Big Ten lacrosse going to be a war as it always is this year. So tons of great games, tons of teams who can win it. Super excited.
All right, you heard it here first. There's your Big Ten preview and rankings heading into the season. I'm excited. We're only a couple weeks away from college lacrosse. Everyone, keep it locked for our next episode next Tuesday. Peace out.